Hello. Disparities in Gender and Health, presented by Barbara Sweetwine. Subjects to be discussed: rethinking gender differences in health, women's health and clinical trials, women's health psychology, psychological issues in transgender health, and barriers to healthcare. These are each text that I read and went through to compose this presentation. So the problems across all of these readings, I'm going to go ahead and go over the slide. The first reading, nicknamed Rethinking Gender Differences in Health, the main problem found in this reading is based in the gap between health outcomes between men and women in the United States of America. The question was asked, why are rational people not choosing a healthier lifestyle on the daily basis? And we're going to get to that answer on the next slide. The next reading, nicknamed Women's Health and Clinical Trials, the problem found in this reading was the underrepresentation of women in clinical trials, which caused, for example, medications being prescribed to women that was contradictory to the female anatomy because the research trials were all geared toward men, and men were the only subjects of those trials. So women were underrepresented, causing poor health outcomes for women, and a pretty big gap between um, positive health outcomes between men and women. And so the third reading, nicknamed Women's Health Psychology, this reading is a review and it presents the same challenges and problems of the female health as the previous readings. This text, in terms of like women being underrepresented and gaps between gender health outcomes. So it basically reviewed pretty much the information that was in the first two readings. It also discusses the positive changes in women's health from the clinical and research perspective. And lastly, the text introduces expectations for future research, um, directions, and clinical applications of women's health psychology. And we're going to get into those expectations into the next slide. The problem in the final reading, nicknamed Psychological Issues in Transgender Health and Barriers, or actually, that's supposed to be Psychosocial Issues, excuse me, in transgender health and barriers to healthcare. Let me just see if I can move this little thing and with this bar here because it's in the way. There goes. This text is a review of the problems faced by the transgender community, problems such as social discrimination, familial discrimination, educational discrimination, a whole lot of discrimination the transgender community is going through, along with housing, employment, and employment discrimination. These discriminatory practices exacerbates the already inaccessible healthcare environment um, that the population has to deal with, the transgender population. And so the problem is that these discriminations ultimately lead to poor health outcomes. So, in talking about the solutions to these problems, we are going to get into that now. So the solution to the problem that I talked about in Rethinking Gender Differences in Health, the main solution presented in this reading is for the biomedical researching communities and the social science researching communities to work together to research the project, because they're saying that it's not just the fact that women have different anatomical differences to men. They're saying that there's also systematic situations in the livelihood of a woman versus a man throughout the decades, precisely before the 90s, especially before the 90s, that led to gaps in women's health versus men's health. The goal is to understand that in order to continue to close the gender difference gap in healthcare is to look into not just the biology of both genders, but to also study the social aspects of the male and female genders together. So they're like, hey, let's get the biomedical community and the social community to do some of this research because it's more than just the differences of being a man and a woman. It's also societal differences. The next solution in the reading, nicknamed Women's Health and Clinical Trials, stated that the fact that women became more represented in clinical trials, it wasn't specifically due to the fact that even though we're proud and happy that the fact that more women are attaining medical degrees and more women are becoming doctors, more women are becoming researchers. This text is saying that this is not necessarily the reason why we were able to progress in women's healthcare, but it was mainly due to the policy and legislation changes. Specifically, federally funded research became possible due to the influx of female workers, because more female workers means more female taxes being paid. And so these women argued that they needed that they would not stand for taxation without representation. They're like, hey, we have all these jobs. We are doing great in the economy. We need to be represented for the if you're going to have just one reason for us being represented in clinical trials, let it be for the fact that we're paying taxes and these federally funded research trials need to represent women because we're paying for it. So due to that fact, that was like the cherry on top that allowed the policy changes in favor of women. Some things, some solutions that was also gained was the fact that there are changes in attitudes toward women. Men fought for women's rights, inclusion of women's research in universities, and of course the legislation changes. So the solution to the third reading, nicknamed Women's Health Psychology, the solution stated in this reading is a comprehensive approach to increasing prevention and intervention of women's health. The comprehensive approach stated includes more funding for women's research, which is I suppose, repetitive design for solutions in this presentation. Comprehensive approach includes, like I said, more funding for women's research, more women's outreach, and magnifying the elimination of inaccessible healthcare due to systemic structures. They're saying we want to make it known that these um, antiquated ways of providing healthcare are leaving women high and dry. And so let's magnify the fact that women are being left high and dry due to these antiquated systems, and let's go ahead and fix those systems. So that's one of the solutions that this text is suggesting. And in the last text, nicknamed Psychological Issues and Transgender Health and Barriers, psychosocial issues in transgender health and barriers to healthcare. Solutions in this text, solutions that are in this text also point to more research. The authors of this text look for more clarity in practices and systemic structures such as governmental policies, social and legal policies to move forward positive interventions and prevention for a transgender community regarding positive health outcomes. And so lastly, this text emphasized the role of community participation as a whole to assist with moving forward better health outcomes for the transgender community, not only in their general health, but also gender affirming healthcare. They're basically saying that the transgender community needs to be looked at and respected enough on an equivalent um, frame, the same ways women needed to be looked at as equivalent to men. Now we're saying that transgenders need to be looked at as equivalent to men and women, and that the community recognizing their humanhood will be a solution to the policy changes, the social changes, and the systemic structure changes that need to be done. as a solution for all of the discrimination that the transgender community is going through. And so the comparison of the solutions, this part of the presentation will be pretty simple because pretty much every reading describes the same type of solutions. There were no contradicting solutions between each of these readings. They all called for more research. The reading nicknamed Rethinking Gender Differences, they uniquely talked about adopting the interdisciplinary model of research, including biomedical and social sciences. Policy changes were included in each of the text solutions, and each reading also discussed the importance of community as a whole coming together to raise a sort of awareness to the problem, to raise an awareness to the problems. The awareness is said to provide a spotlight on these disparities so that the disparities can be targeted with viable solutions. And my references are here. And thank you so much for enjoying my presentation. I hope that you did indeed.